so stupid as not to know he had to do that. Just as Hitler and Mussolini made an even more aggressive deal with the Roman Catholic Church and with some of the Protestants. And remember, the other great axis of evil person of that time, the Emperor of Japan, was not just a religious person, but actually a god. So fascism, communism, and Stalinism and Nazism are actually nothing like as secular as some people think, and much more religious than most people know. But here's what a fair test would be. Find a society that's adopted the teachings of Spinoza and Voltaire, Galileo, Einstein, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, and gone down the pits as a result of doing that, into famine and war and dictatorship and torture and repression. That would be a fair test.
Well,
that's the test I'd like to. That's the experiment I'd like to run. I don't think that's going to end up with a gulag.
Hi, thank you for coming. More ladies asking questions would be awesome. And please, I implore you to be really hilarious so we can prove Mr. Hitchens wrong about why women cannot be funny.
I was wondering what you'd done with your chicks here, I must say.
We're a technology company. So I'm not religious, but just to play a little devil's advocate, what do you say to studies that show that people who consistently go to church, who pray, who believe in God, have like lower blood pressure and live longer lives, etc.?
Well, I'd say it wouldn't prove much. I mean, it was hard to prove. I'm not sure I would be able to trust the methodology, but suppose it was true. The same could be said of being a Moonie, for example. I mean, it is said that Louis Farrakhan's racist, crackpot, Nation of Islam sectarian gang gets young men off drugs. For all I know, it does. It may, but that doesn't recommend it to me. Nor does it prove a thing about its theology, if you see what I mean. Sure. Whereas I can absolutely tell you that of the suicide bombing population, 100% are faith-based. And I don't think that in itself disproves faith, but I think it should make you skeptical of that kind of random sampling.
Sure. There seems to be
of the genital mutilation community.
I have a lot of progressive religious friends who I used to be pretty condescending towards religion, but I feel like I've learned a lot from them and learned a lot about their religious practice and what it means to them. And as you stated earlier, a lot of religious people don't really believe all the tenets of what their faith says anyway. So I feel like those friends of mine are looking for community and looking for a feeling of oneness with other people and with the universe. And ultimately, on a scientific level, that bears out anyway, because on like a quantum level, everything is one and is the same.
Yes.
So I feel like churches, at least in this country, provide a sense of community that I don't think exists any other way in our culture. I don't feel like I had that growing up, and I feel like my friends that went to church, they can go back to their church now, and there are all of these adults that, aside from their parents, that were there to nurture them as they were growing up and that ask how they're doing, and I never had that, so I'm jealous of that in a sense.
It takes a lot to make me cry, but you... see me afterwards. I mean, we just... Look, actually, it's what I said about if those of you who read de Tocqueville on democracy in America show that's what he said about communitarianism and religion. It's the reason why America is so religious, but it's a different form of religion. Ask yourself a related question. It's amazing to me how many Americans change religion when they get married. You hear it all the time. You've heard it. I used to be a Seventh-day Adventist, but my wife was Congregationalist. Now I go to the Congregationalists. It doesn't matter. The Seventh-day Adventists used to say, if you don't stay with us, you're going straight to hell. Changed very easily. Go to another church instead. Wouldn't consider perhaps not going to one, but it shows the depth and the strength of religious allegiance. I also think that, well, it's notorious about, say, Polish Catholics in Chicago or Greek Orthodox or many Jews. The church has been a means of transmitting, preserving an ethnic tradition as well, a solidarity in the face of often quite bleak kinds of life. And now there's even a phenomenon known as churchianity, and expressed by the megachurches of people who lead half-transient lives, who don't have very stable employment or residence, who are often moving around the country. On a Sunday, they want to know where they can go take the old jalopy and be among friends. And these characters are waiting for them, believe you me, to remove what few savings they do have left from them. Because that's another indissoluble fact about American religion. Just as community and blood pressure may be involved, it has to be mentioned in the same breath as open fraud to an absolutely astonishing extent. I mean, the shakedown community, the genital mutilation community, the suicide bombing community, the child abuse, I would prefer to say child rape communities, all of these are communities of faith, believe you me.
Oh, is it my turn?
Sir.
Sorry to diverge a little from the immediate subject, but you've expressed your regret for this perverse impulse in the human spirit, which is to desire to be dominated, to prostrate itself before the mysterious altar of power. But it occurs to me that the current government of this nation has, in a calculated fashion, exploited this perverse desire and exploited the language which seems to inspire it or appeal to it. Now, I'm strongly opposed to a particular policy of this government, which is the indefinite detention of so-called terrorist suspects in Cuba. And in particular, I dislike the way the government tries to justify this policy by using these very discourses of power and secrecy, which come with a particular religious stamp. So I would like to ask, not to be impertinent, how you can square what you've said today with other comments you have made, apparently in support of this very policy.
Well, there's no danger of you being impertinent, so don't worry about that. I've just returned from Guantanamo. Well, I say just, I was there last month. It took me a long time to get down there, and I haven't yet written anything about it, so you won't know my views, as I'm not sure that I know them in full myself. But about your question, I know what my views are about indefinite detention in principle. I don't see, or must have missed, any allusion at all made to religion in the decision to declare them enemy combatants. You suggested there was a religious justification for the detention policy.
Not a religious justification, per se, but in my opinion, the Bush administration, in its public deliveries, often uses a language of power very much akin to that used by religious tyrants and demagogues down the centuries. And this language comes out particularly strongly when they're justifying controversial actions, such as Guantanamo Bay.
Well, again, I think we'd have a disagreement. I mean, the language they seem to use, to me, is the language of the secular language of emergency powers and special circumstances requiring extraordinary measures. It's a very old argument, especially within the United States. Goes back to President Lincoln's attempt to suspend habeas corpus in the Civil War. It reminds me of that, not of any argument about or with theocracy.
Emergency powers and extraordinary rendition and other terms like this, to me, rather smack of secrecy, jargon, of the same kind used by preachers.
Or by secular despots. I mean, I just don't think you're quite carrying your point about the theological. By all means, if you want to discuss the question of civil liberties, let's do so. But I mean, it's a departure from the rubric. The Bush administration is not conducting a holy war in this respect. It is confronting a holy war, however. I mean, one thing you can't miss about the inhabitants of Guantanamo is how faith-based they are. And that's part of the reason why we presented with this problem. The difficulty seems to me to be the following. If you treat them as criminals, as some argue, then you can't say really that you're fighting a war. Then it's only a law and order question. If you say you're fighting a war, then in what sense are these not enemy soldiers? If they're enemy soldiers, how can you try them as criminals? Why are you holding people as criminals and building a military tribunal? I visited the room where they're going to have them tried, where they'll be able to say, well, thanks for having me here and admitting that I am a soldier, when the whole point is that the Geneva Convention says that they're not. So that's bad enough to begin with, and it's a territory no government has yet had to step onto.